Thanks, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I was watching people file in. There didn't look to be too many bleary-eyed people, so I assume the caffeine is taking effect. My name is Peter Callies. I'm the Vice President of Product Development Lifecycle at SureScripts. Now, what the heck is a Vice President of Product Development Lifecycle? It means I have responsibility for things like program management, project management, all things Agile, including our Scrum Masters, and our overall product development process. I'm going to take you on a journey today and tell you about how we got to Agile program management. But before I do that, I want to provide a bit of context, because context is really important. When you apply Agile principles and practices, the outcome always looks a little bit different depending on the context. So I work at SureScripts. The name SureScripts comes from what the company did first, which was be the network between doctors and pharmacies for electronic prescribing, or e-prescribing. Currently, we connect over 700 electronic health record applications used by more than 800,000 healthcare professionals, impacting more than 270 million lives. Last year, over 6 billion, it's billion with a B, transactions were exchanged through our network. From a contextual perspective, the easiest way to think about SureScripts is as a B2B network. Our products are primarily back-end services that other people are connecting their applications to. So it's really important for our APIs to be rock solid so that people can actually use the network to improve healthcare. Now, when I was pitching this idea to Ryan, who introduced me, he's the track chair for all the talks in this room. I had I had maybe 15 slides that I had put together, and I went through this whole pitch, and Ryan's in marketing, so Ryan's really good at summarizing things really concisely. So I got through the whole pitch, and Ryan said, and I'm reading this because I don't want to misquote him, "Adopting Agile is a process of layering in changes. It's about failing and optimizing, and that in itself is Agile. Agile is not about the destination as much as the constant journey." So Ryan summed it up really well, so that's my presentation today. Thank you for attending. But seriously, Agile is a journey, and I'm going to use that theme today, and this winding road is kind of emblematic of that theme. You can see a little ways ahead of you, but there are some curves. You're going to have to steer, you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to apply the brakes, you're going to have to accelerate sometimes. And you can't see all the way out in the distance. There are things around that last curve that you just can't see coming at you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we were before we started adopting Agile. I'm going to talk about our first steps and how Jira supported us with that. I'm going to take you into what I consider to be program management and talk a little bit about what we call the possible, valuable, viable, or PVV model. And then finally, I'll tell you how Confluence is helping us operate in this environment. So before we began adopting Agile, we kind of had a waterfall process, but it was really more or less chaos. The confluence of three important events helped us change the way we do product development. First, we had a pretty stereotypical 6-month waterfall project that looked like it was on track as late as 1 month before its scheduled completion. However, it ended up being 3 months late because of misunderstood requirements and poor code quality. Second, we were growing pretty rapidly. We had a lot of new people coming in. We needed them to actually learn and produce value at the same time. We couldn't afford to wait for them to learn enough about the system to produce big upfront designs and estimates. Third, we had a product manager who wanted to completely revamp a core product. We were estimating that it would take about 2.5 years to do this. And the product manager insisted that none of it would be valuable until it was all done, so we could deploy nothing until it was all completed. So essentially, we were staring a 2.5-year death march project in the face. I'm sure some of these things sound familiar to some of you. I see some heads nodding. All right. So we were unpredictable in terms of our delivery capabilities. We had poor quality, both in terms of requirements and code. And we had long lead times before delivery of value to customers. Our first steps, we began adopting agile methods in early 2011, primarily as a means to improve our predictability and our quality. And that's a really important thing to remember. Predictability and quality was important for us. We didn't adopt agile to go faster or to get to market faster or anything like that. We wanted to improve our predictability and our quality. You have to remember that SureScripts is a network to which other people connect their applications. They need to know what we're working on and when it's going to be ready. They need us to be predictable. And the network is being used to improve healthcare, so the quality of the network needs to be so good that people don't even think about it. With help of the consulting company, we came up with this list of to-dos as we began our journey. We were primarily focused on team-level agility, so we organized our systems analysts, our QA analysts, our database engineers, our software engineers into 6 cross-functional teams and aligned them with product families. The teams produce working tested code every 2 weeks, which has really helped us with our predictability and our quality. Membership on the teams is stable. We funnel new work to the teams instead of forming new teams around new projects. Because the teams are stable, we have a really clear view of our capacity that has helped us stop trying to work on too many concurrent projects at the same time. Jira Agile is used by all of our teams. Each team has its own board that's driven by a filter keyed off of the value of a custom field named, it's very creative, Agile team. When we started adopting Agile over 3 years ago, Greenhopper was the Agile plugin for Jira. And those of you who go back that far know that Greenhopper was not nearly as good as the boards that exist today. So when we started adopting, all of our teams had physical card walls that they used that were basically duplicating exactly what was in Jira. So they'd move the card and then they'd go into Jira and update the status and all this kind of mumbo jumbo. With the advent of the new boards, the teams no longer have a physical card wall. All of them got rid of the physical card wall. When they're doing planning, they put the plan mode of the board up on the wall. They project it up on the wall. When they're doing their stand-ups, they project the work mode of the board up on the wall. Each team also has its own Confluence space where they're doing pretty typical documentation and communication. But some of the teams have actually started integrating Confluence with Jira. In this example, Team 2 has created a set of backlog pages. Team 2 wanted to keep track of some issues that weren't necessarily assigned to them. Because the issues aren't assigned to them, they're not going to show up on their Agile board. But the team came up with a creative way to keep track of them nonetheless. So the takeaways from our first steps: working tested code every 2 weeks, improved our predictability and our quality, and stable teams provided us with a clear view of our capacity. Continuing the journey, we encounter planning and scaling. It didn't take long for our teams to stabilize and consistently deliver working tested code. We learned early on that the teams could fire on all cylinders if they had a well-groomed backlog, but they really struggled when the backlog of work was vague. So as a means to create well-groomed backlogs across all the teams, I scheduled our very first quarterly release planning meeting to occur about 3 months after we began our Agile adoption. Nicely aligned with a vacation that I already had planned. Seriously, I went on vacation and left one of my Scrum Masters to facilitate our very first attempt at synchronized release planning. Shortly thereafter, she transferred into a different department. All right, that first planning session was far from smooth, but we got through it and we adapted. The key takeaway from that first session was that planning for a quarter can't be accomplished in a 2-day period. If you read the SAFe documentation, they have this quarterly planning meeting that happens in 2 days, and it's like, you get together for 2 days and poof, the magic happens, you know what you're gonna do for the next quarter. Planning really needs to be continuous with occasional bursts to synchronize around a specific plan. So we began applying that lesson, but the methods used to do continuous planning and to prepare for that release planning event were a bit of a dark art. Some product groups did it really well, but others really struggled with it. To complicate matters, we were growing to the point that we have 13 teams supporting 7 product lines across 2 business units. So we knew that a command and control approach to planning wasn't going to work for us. Instead of the dark art, we wanted people to understand how they could consistently contribute to taking an idea and turning it into a product feature. So we began looking for a framework that would allow distributed decision-making within certain guardrails. At the time we were going through this, I was reading Leffingwell's Agile Software Requirements, which is a precursor to SAFe, and I was reading Principles of Product Development Flow by Don Reinertsen, 2 books I highly recommend. I took the concepts from these books and applied them to an existing stage gate development process that we had laying around at SureScripts to create our own lean agile product development process. Now, I'm not much of a graphic artist, as you'll see later, so I've got the SAFe big picture up on my wall that I can point and grunt at it when I'm trying to explain scaled agile concepts to people. Excuse me. Confluence, which we started using about a year ago, is a primary tool that we use when we scale Agile outside of teams. This is just a really simple example of documentation of our product development process. It has its own space. And the key for us with Confluence is that the authoring has been so easy, and it just has completely changed the way that we collaborate, because prior to Confluence, pretty much everybody produced their documentation in Word documents and then uploaded them to our SharePoint site, which basically just turned SharePoint into a really expensive file server. And all you saw was a list of documents, and it was just, well, I should stop talking about SharePoint right there. All right. So the key takeaway from planning and scaling. Planning needs to be continuous with occasional bursts to synchronize around a specific plan. All right, so we had this high-level model in place, and that was all well and good, but I kind of felt like we were losing something in the process of using it. When you look at Agile scaling models, I think it's easy to get caught up in all the governance processes required to implement and operate a multi-tiered model. You can look at all the logical lifecycle flows of the functional decomposition tokens, the epics, the features, and the stories, and say, man, this is all neat and orderly. How could anything possibly go wrong? Some of the things that started to go wrong for us were long lead times on the fuzzy front end, creation of lengthy business requirements documents by business analysts, sign-offs on those BRDs, and narrowing in on solutions very early with late engagement from technologists who could actually validate that those solutions were viable. I started to hear phrases like handoff and sign-off, phrases that reminded me of the time before we had any cross-functional collaboration. Basically, our journey had been interrupted by a return to waterfall. When I looked at the Agile Manifesto that I keep taped on the wall above my desk, it bugged the hell out of me that we were losing sight of the very first value, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, as we tried to scale Agile to earlier phases of product development. And although I was frustrated, I really struggled to figure out what to do. That changed one day when I was talking to my friend Dennis Stevens. Imagine that. An interaction with an individual actually helped me move forward. When we finished our conversation, we had come up with a simple model that we were calling Possible, Valuable, Viable, or PVV. We wanted to make sure that conversations were happening at all phases of product development between people who could evaluate whether something was possible, valuable, and viable. Possible, we have the organizational capability and capacity to undertake it. Valuable, there's value to our customers and to us. And viable, there's an achievable technical solution for it. Is everyone familiar with RACI? I see a lot of heads nodding. The acronym stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. The Wikipedia definition is there on the right, and I don't want you to read the whole thing. I just highlighted some things in red. They're important. You can see that RACI emphasizes single-person accountability, delegation, sign-offs, and conversations with people who can actually contribute but not be responsible or accountable for the outcome of something. Maybe I'm taking it too literally, but it sounds odd to me. Our original product development process, the stage gate product development process that we had a really extensive RACI matrix. In fact, in the deliver phase, 14 groups were designated as being responsible. Now, it would have been really easy for me to just take RACI and adapt it to the Lean Agile model that we had. It'd be so much easier to go with that, something that people were familiar with, instead of trying to explain a new model to people. But RACI really bugged me. There were just things about it that I was uncomfortable with. So I did some research and some self-reflection, and I came up with a number of things that I was uncomfortable with. Here are a couple of them. So first, the single ringable neck is a system that rarely works. There's a saying that success has many parents, but failure is an orphan. So in other words, a person in a position of accountability is going to be very anxious to take credit when things go well, and is going to be pointing in every other direction when things go poorly. CYA is a really important behavior for someone in a position of accountability if they want to stay in that position. It leads to behaviors like sign-offs, actions like sign-offs, as if the requirements or assumptions or constraints aren't going to change. People argue with me that you can solve that by implementing a change control process. Of course, the change control process has to have its own RACI matrix, at which point I just want to scream. So instead, I think conversation followed up with simple documentation, if necessary, fits the bill much better. It facilitates the flow of value instead of inhibiting the flow of value. Another issue I have with RACI is that splitting of responsibility is never black and white. Think about what happens when things fall through the cracks. We typically react by trying to define differences between roles and responsibilities at ever finer levels of granularity. This gives people an even clearer box, a clear boundary that they shouldn't step outside of. The problem with that is that there's always gray area between the boundaries. You can't possibly define away the gray areas. It just doesn't work. And when we try to differentiate these things at ever finer levels of granularity, it just gives people more incentive not to worry about those things in the gray areas. I think what might work better is smaller teams responsible for larger domains that have fuzzy boundaries. One of the risks, probably the key risk with PVV is what I call consensus paralysis. I absolutely hate it when consensus-driven decision-making leads to no or slow decisions being made. It drives me nuts. So a couple strategies here are make sure teams stay small so that there are fewer minds to align, and make sure that the teams are clearly incented to deliver value as quickly as possible. See, I told you I wasn't much of a graphic artist. But when you apply PVV to the top level of our product development process, this is what you get. Early on, the executive committee and general managers are determining whether we've got the high-level organizational capability and capacity to undertake something. They're having conversations with business managers who understand the market value, and architects who can help with build-buy decisions. In the middle is the area I call program management. That's where we're decomposing an idea into versions and epics and coordinating their delivery. At this point, the PMO, yes, we have a PMO, is making sure that the right people in the organization are available. Having conversations with business analysts who can prioritize features by value, and architects or tech leads who are coming up with the specific solution architecture. When we get down to actually implementing software, the people inside of our Scrum teams are having those PVV conversations. So the takeaway from the PVV is that we want to create conversations between people who can evaluate whether something is possible, valuable, and viable. And we want to do that at all phases of product development, from the time that we're evaluating an idea to the point that we're actually developing and delivering software. All right, well, the conversations generated by the PVV are critical. Having some documentation is important also. If you're like me, you frequently forget why you made the decisions you made, and it gets worse the older I get. So documentation is an important reference point for decision makers. Documentation is also important for those people, especially when we're talking about versions and epics. That type of documentation is really important for people who are actually implementing software. It provides them with the big picture so that they understand where the opportunities and the guardrails lay. We use Confluence to document at the program level. This is a template space that we have put together so that teams can use this when they're standing up a space for a new product. We have a specific hierarchy of pages that we want them to use so that stakeholders don't need to reorient when they go from product space to product space. I've drilled down to the epic level here. This is a point where you might verbosely describe a new feature, and then this would have a link to a sibling epic in Jira, so you could get from here to the implementation details if you needed to, and so that people working on the implementation details could get back to the big picture if necessary. You might have deduced that we're taking advantage of some built-in blueprints, like meeting notes, and we're also taking advantage of some other tools to do things like RAID documentation. So we still have some traditional project management tools in our toolbox that we use when they're appropriate. Sorry this one is so heavily redacted, but it actually represents real work in a competitive product space. So here's what some of our program teams are doing to manage their backlogs at the program level. In this case, the team used the ad hoc Canvas plugin to create a roadmap. You can read the roadmap left to right, things on the left being delivered sooner rather than later. If you look at version 1 and version 2, you can see little page icons next to the items. These represent links to actual epic pages, just like the template that I showed you on the last page. So you can get from the roadmap to the epic definition to the implementation details in Jira, and we actually do use Stash, so you could get to the code check-ins. Really nice, easy traceability. All right, please don't take away from the last couple of slides that I think documentation is a substitute for conversation or that it's an adequate form of communication. I don't want to have my Agile know-it-all master practitioner certificate, whatever, revoked. I just think Confluence is a really powerful tool for facilitating and documenting conversations. So we're near the end. The initiative that our teams have taken and the value that they're delivering are two things that make me want to get out of bed in the morning and go to work. It's pretty powerful. We gave them tools and a framework within which to work, and they've really taken the initiative. It brings me to my final takeaway. And we're at the end. Don't lose it now, okay? This is a really important one. For effective Agile program management, you need to have appropriately distributed decision-making. With that, I will leave you with the key takeaways summarized in convenient tweetable length, and I'll say thank you for your attention. So I'm over my time, so we don't have time for I don't think we have time for questions right now. Yep, Ryan says no. But if anybody wants to talk, I'll just stand outside the room. Because this is 20 minutes, I really had to condense it. One thing I did leave out that I think is pretty cool is our approach to metrics. So if anybody wants to talk about that or something else in the presentation, I'll be outside.